Hey, what's going on, guys? It's me, Train Man, and that was not the intro I wanted to give. Anyways, hello and welcome back to the Zombie Train episode 217. This is, of course, an episode where the video is taken from the series Under Construction. If you want to see it in real time with commentary, go watch that episode. The episode that corresponds to this, it should be coming out at about the same time. Anyways, this episode is about water. This was a question asked by Ryan Lobner on episode 198, and the full wording of the question goes, Did you also try to convert CN3254 to have an aux water tender? Now, here's the thing. We didn't need to go to such lengths to have an auxiliary water tender. When we wanted more water, we just grabbed a tank car, filled the thing full of water, and then sort of connected a hose. It worked pretty well. We attached it sort of like a siphon, so when water was being pulled out of the tender, it would pull water from the car behind it, and it worked fairly well. So we did not have an auxiliary water tender, but we did have extra water. Now, that sort of brings about the subject of water in general. Now, you think about it, you think about just where we get our water on a daily basis. Now, I know a lot of you, maybe, have well water, and the rest of you are probably hooked up to normal water mains if you live in a city or in a town that has, that sort of water infrastructure. Which most places do at this point. Having a well is sort of the exception, as opposed to the rule these days. Anyways, and the fact of the matter was, we would roll up on a lot of places where the water infrastructure was down. If we found somebody with a well, then we'd be able to juice it, put power into it, get some water pumping, and get some water out of it. But if we pulled up to a town and found a fire hydrant next to the tracks, then more often than not, we would not be able to use that fire hydrant to get any water into our train. Now, we did need water for a bunch of different things. I've talked about the water systems on the train before. The hydroponics lab had its own self-contained water system. Water generally wasn't transferred between cars, so the showers in the bunk car also had their own water system. The dining hall had its own water system. And typically they were heated when they needed to be heated by steam heat. So it wasn't something that was particularly complicated, and we built off the infrastructure that we had. Anyways. So when it comes to getting water, then we started getting a steam-powered pump, which we would let sit. It was, I mean, you could call it portable, but it was really kind of unwieldy. We ended up building these makeshift brackets onto the tank car that we used and hanging the thing there and attaching it there. Of course, it wasn't permanently attached because when we needed to get... So, here's the thing that I forgot to get to, or that I haven't gotten to yet. So, we'd oftentimes pull up at a place, railroads oftentimes followed streams, rivers, etc. And so we were often following streams and rivers. So it wasn't hard to get the engine water. It was kind of important to make sure that the river/stream was potable water, or potable-ish. Safe enough to drink that nobody was going to get ill and die. But we didn't have to worry about a lot of things because we went from place to place, so it wasn't like combined effects of one particular bad water supply were going to get to us over a period of weeks or months or even years. But at the same time, you did want to make sure that your water was okay, and we did. We even had stuff to test the pH, but generally that was used by the people in the hydroponics car. And by people, I mean literally one person, because she was the expert on it, and nobody else went in there without her permission. Anyways, so the pump had two lengths of hose. One of them would connect into the tank car and was normally just hanging in there because we would shut the lid on it, kind of. And it was also good for keeping the lid cracked open so that air could get in so that the siphon would work. Honest to goodness, we did not have that many problems with critters sort of sneaking into the water tank, but it did happen every once in a while. Thankfully, that was not drinking water in there, because that would have led to problems when you had, like, a rat that jumped in and then realized it couldn't, it swam around until it died, and then, it was nasty. That happened more than once. It wasn't a rat every time, but you get the gist. So we tried to just sort of leave it cracked, so we would close it on the hose, and then the other length of hose came out of the other end of the pump, and you just dip that into a river. Later, we actually kind of got smart, and we hooked up a pool bobber that we found, not like a float that you'd lie on, but like one of those things that you'd throw in a hot tub to keep the chlorine okay. It would float around. And we gutted that and just stuck the hose through it, so we had this floating thing with the hose so that the hose would be laying on the bottom of the, typically a shallow river, sucking up dirt. Because we had, at the beginning, or, early on before we realized, oh, hey, that's how all the dirt's getting in the tank car. We started having some pretty bad sedimentation in the second tank car. And then we almost ran out of water because we had a lot less available than I thought. Because what happened was, there was so much sediment in the tank car, it covered the bottom of the siphon. And that meant that the water was not able to get from the tank car to the tender, and so we dried up the tender, and that was it. It was like, why aren't we having any water? Somebody go check the water supply. They open the tank car's full, open the tender's empty. Oh, crap. And that's when we got the pump and started just pumping stuff into the tender really fast. While we tried to figure out what the hell happened, eventually we realized the entire tank car had sedimented. Pretty much, like the bottom quarter of it was full of dirt. This was after a while. But that's when we realized, hey, this is really a problem, because we're basically vacuuming mud into the tank car. But that was one of the closer calls. Now, we did have a couple of instances with water when we were running out in the middle of nowhere. When we knew we were going to be short, we would typically steal a second tank car from somewhere. The problem becomes very quickly, you typically have a decent idea of what was in tank cars or what is in tank cars. And so that means, A, you have to find an empty one unless you just want to dump all of whatever it is all over the ground, which it's not like we had to care that much, but it stands to reason that if a tank car is full of something, you generally want whatever it's full of. Even if it's like hydrochloric acid or something, you can use that for stuff. We didn't have the biggest use for that, but that wasn't what we found most of the time. It was generally oil. And you don't just want to be dumping oil all over the place when oil is particularly a scarce resource at that point, because we weren't running oil wells. There. Anyways, I was forgetting. Okay, anyways. So, the whole water situation with that was fairly well done, I guess. We tended to keep it under wraps as to what we had, what we were using, how we were using it. And although that does say, so you go through a lot of water in a steam engine, more than you typically go through in like a daily house, the day-to-day usage of a household. That's what I'm trying to say. And that, it's kind of a duh moment, but that, it is what it is. So that meant the hydroponics lab aside, the dining hall, or the dining car, I should say, and the barracks had smaller tanks, like much smaller tanks, than obviously a tank car or even the tank in the tender. So this meant they would run out of water before we would most of the time, even though we used a lot more than them. It was just because there was no easy way to figure out how much was in there without sort of tearing open the roof. And it was, when we get water, we'll run the pumps until they're full, and then we'll fill them again when we find water again. And that worked most of the time, but we did have some issues where it's like, water pressure's dropping, so we must be really close to running out of water, so guys, just don't use so much water. Or recycle what you can. The system, I would have liked to have the system hooked up to be like gray water, where you use it to flush toilets, but we didn't have those kind of toilets. And yeah, no, it was from an engineering point of view, or from the point of view of we want to make the most of what little resources we have. The water situation was particularly vexing because you'd sort of want to reuse water for stuff, but there weren't too many things that we used water for, and of those things, I don't really think anything other than, running the engine, maybe, could tolerate, basically using gray water to do it, or, and any sort of contaminated water. Although, to follow that up, it's not like we had ready, easy access to the kinds of water treatment chemicals that they use in steam locomotives in the modern day. So, that really sort of compounded the issue, is what I should say. Because, we already were using whatever water we could get our hands on that was clean enough to run the engine without worrying about it too much. And then we could not treat it properly to make the engine last longer and work better. So we ended up sort of, we were flying by the skin of our teeth, of course. By the seat of our pants, I should say. But we don't want to have anything in the tender that could possibly throw off the balance of, pH and of mineral content, stuff like that. It's not like we ran all the water through a Brita filter, but it was a bad situation, or it was not a great situation, that we really did not want to make worse. Now, everyone on the train understood that the engine was our lifeline, and that you don't do anything to mess with the engine, and if there's a problem with the engine, you can be called upon at any time to help with it. That just became common knowledge to everyone on the train. Even sort of the people that were passing through, so to speak, I won't say they all picked it up immediately, but they all sort of, what's the word? The ones that were around when something went wrong were very quickly aware of the fact that I was not the boss. The engine was the boss. And that shone through to us and to a lot of our crew members when we had to ration water so that we could pull some stuff out of the water tanks to put in the tender because we thought we weren't going to make it. That was done without complaint. When we had to stop and fix something, that was done without complaint. It was, it wasn't, well, why aren't we moving? It was the knowledge that, we very clearly cannot move because something is wrong, something is broken, and that is first priority and needs to be fixed. The few people that did not understand this generally got on my nerves very quickly. Needless to say, because they were acting like spoiled passengers, and to some extent, when you say to somebody, whatever, train man out.